Awesome. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Notary Governance Call, the first of two Notary Governance calls for today, Tuesday, October 12th. Unfortunately, Galen is not able to make it today, so I'll be running this on my own today, but happy to have all of you here and excited to get started. I'm just going to share my screen and we'll take it from there. Let's see, what is the best way to do this? Cool. Can somebody give me a thumbs up that they can see the agenda? Awesome. Thank you very much. So as usual, we will start out with the metrics and looking at, well, I bumped up this sort of 6-month program goal updates thing that we started doing 2 weeks ago to cover that as part of like metrics and where we are in progress with the program. And then we'll talk about some improvements to LDN application tracking. And then have some time for discussions and pitches if there's any clients in the room that show up or are already here, and talk about changes to the process and have space for open discussion. I think in general, the agenda for this call is a little front-loaded, so it shouldn't end up being that packed, and hopefully we'll have good time for some lively conversation at the end, because there are a couple of topics that at least I know I'd like to propose, and I know some of you are also thinking about. So with that, let's get started. Of course, if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hands. All right, on the metrics front, so looking at changes to time to data cap and responsiveness in general, it looks like our metrics is sort of the same, like plus or minus within like an error difference. As you can see, the numbers are still within like 12 hours of each other for the most part, and so not substantive change here. Sorry, was that something? Did somebody say something? I guess not. Okay. I do want to add that this is again like aggregating from like several months of data. So we are trying to work on getting just like the last 4 weeks or the last month's worth of data as well published. But for that, I think a better indicator is actually this table here. So we'll get to that in a second. But yeah, in general, steady stated on this front in terms of the actual like funnel and the utilization of the data cap that's being handed out. Today, it's roughly the same for both LDN and non, which is at about 30 to 35% of the data cap being given to clients is being used in deals. What that does mean is, between the last couple of weeks or so, we've finally crossed, 1 petabyte worth of data stored through Filecoin Plus on the network, which is awesome. Great milestone for the community to hit. But yeah, continuing to onwards and upwards. Like as you all know, we're trying to work together to get this to the next magnitude of operation, whether that's increasing availability of data cap or increasing the amount of data cap used in making deals so that clients that deserve to have a frictionless or friction-free experience onboarding onto Filecoin have that opportunity. Today, I also wanted to call out some of the stats in this bottom row here, which is that currently, if a client applies via the manual sort of verification pathway instead of the LDN one, so they go to the app and they ask for an allocation, or they go straight to the client onboarding GitHub repo, about 63% of those applications get a response from a notary. So that's typically the response where the notary says, hey, here's my due diligence process. Like, here are additional questions I need you to answer before I can give you that data cap. And then resulting from that, about 25-ish% of applying clients actually get data cap. And I think it's good to have this kind of a filter. I do think that the first box should be a much higher number, but I think it's also hard to track that, right? Because we've seen that clients will sometimes go and delete GitHub applications. And that's something, that's one of the topics I want to bring up later on. But it's sort of hard to track how frequently a notary, or ensuring that the notaries are actually responding to requests that are coming in. The success rate of those applications, I don't think that number is too low or too high per se. I would actually look to you folks to see if you think that's reasonable for the notaries that are in the call or the notaries that are watching this recorded, because it's very likely that like not 100% should be getting the data cap. So I understand that there should be some filter, and I'm glad that we're able to administer like a due diligence process and make decisions based on that. So that's awesome. On that note, let's take a little deeper look into individual notary activity and how that's been going in the client onboarding repo. So as of the last 2 weeks, we've seen about, actually, let's do it this way, where if you just take a look at the client onboarding report today, there's 46 open issues. 26 came in the last week, and there was a handful more in the week before. So it's like something like in the low 30s for the last 2 weeks. And the amount that are total granted right now are 202, which is interesting because 2 weeks ago, when we took the same data, that number was at 210, which definitely means that like either labels are being changed even after the state's being granted, or the more likely outcome, which is people are actually removing the GitHub issues. I'm not entirely sure why this is happening, so I would love to get some insight if people know. But it does look like clients, after applying for data cap and even successfully receiving it, will sometimes go and then delete their application. This is interesting because like all that info is still tracked, right? Like we still have, for those of us that are subscribed with email notifications, still have all that content in email. And we have bots and dashboards tracking this stuff. So we're still aware of who the clients are and what they're doing with the data cap, what the addresses are that received it. It's just interesting that they would want to remove the actual issue. So yeah, if you folks have any ideas on that one, and have a sense of why that might be happening, I think it'd be great if you could share. On the right, we pulled the same table that we used to from Textile's Notary Stats repo. So this is more like individual statistics on where we are with each of the individual notaries, the amount of allocations they've granted, how long it typically takes for them to grant data cap, how many are currently open, and then the amount of time it typically takes for a notary to make a decision, which is the one right over here. And then there's the sort of the amount that don't get data cap, which is, I think, fine to look at as like an indicator of selectiveness. I think these numbers are pretty high across the board, and I think that's great. We also went through a phase where I think clients were spamming a bunch of notaries and getting a lot of duplicate applications out there. And so a lot of that, I think, gets attributed here. But would love to see steps being taken to sort of improve some of these. A lot of folks here are in like the high tens, and we often talk about, or at least low tens, but we often talk about wanting to do this in a couple of days. And so instead of it being like a, hey, why are you taking so long? I think the conversation should be, what are the things that could be done that would help you take less time? Like, what do you think you're blocked on as a notary, or where would you want more information for you to feel like you can comfortably make a decision? Like, regardless of whether or not it's giving somebody data cap, like, sure, it might be that you don't want to give them data cap. Or it might be applications that come across more as like suspicious or requiring additional due diligence that end up like requiring more time. But something should happen from a tooling perspective or general process perspective, or maybe even like client education perspective, that we can do together as a community to improve the quality of the incoming applications, as well as the interaction points between you two, as in the notary and the client. Cool. With that, diving into sort of where we're headed for the 6-month goals, we've talked about these for the last 2 or 3 calls now, just updating each of the current statuses and chatting through sort of what we should be looking forward to. So for the first focus area of like getting more volume of data onboarded through the Filecoin Plus program, we're targeting 500 PB bytes. That, of course, being across LDNs and clients. There's current status is roughly in the 40 PB byte range. And what we're looking at is the new LDN process through issue 217 that was shipped after the last call should hopefully make applications more approachable and should also give us an opportunity to vet more clients more quickly. But we've also been talking about whether or not we want to do additional notary elections or find a way to increase the data cap in circulation, not just through LDNs, and talking about programs that will help onboard legitimate clients or verifiable clients like through Filecoin Gravity. But yeah, generally speaking, like I do think that this goal is like pretty, I think we're quite a ways off still. It's certainly a slightly lofty goal, but I do think it's a really good thought exercise at the very least in terms of thinking about what needs to change in order for our systems and our processes to actually scale to support this kind of load. And I know I'm saying 6 months here, but at this point, it's really 5 months, given that we've been talking about this for nearly a month. And so we're continuing to edge closer to, I don't know, maybe we should set a date, like maybe it's March of next year or something. But yeah, we're continuing to edge closer towards it, and we should tactically start thinking. I'd love to see if there are any ideas, either in the call right now or in GitHub discussions about ways in which we can level this up. The next focus area, which is I think my personal most interesting one at the moment, which is time to data cap. Curious to see ways in which we can get time to data cap down substantively. So just to be clear, this goes back to sort of the actual client onboarding experience, right? Like ultimately, the point of Filecoin Plus is to ensure that clients that should be receiving data cap or should have access to making deals on the network are able to get that as easily as possible. And I often draw this comparison where, like, if you go to like a cloud offering today, like a Web 2 offering, and you want to store data, it's like you just able to do that. You create an account and you can store data. And then once you hit certain limits, you get in touch with the support team and you talk to them for like a couple of hours. And then within like usually 12 hours, sometimes 24, if additional KYC is required, you then get like maximal quota requests, etc., so that you can leverage that offering as best as possible. And so when a client comes to Filecoin and it's like, oh, I'd like to onboard data, and then they hit like like TTD of like 12 days, and it's like, oh, you can't really do anything, or you can sort of get started, but it's not going to be as good as you'd wanted it to be, or like the ideal path that you sort of had was to go get data cap and do this, then sort of expecting that it would be an hour or less than a day at least, right? For like a higher magnitude. And so like orienting around like how do we actually align on an improved client user experience? How do we align around a high quality client onboarding story to enable the growth of the network and the productivity of the network? I think is a key sort of focus area for us. And so the sort of metrics that we talked about several weeks ago were getting this 0 to 1 terabyte down to like less than an hour. And the prompt there was like the discussion topic that was started on like how do we actually scale auto verifiers or automated notaries up to being able to do that, and like what needs to go into that from a due diligence perspective that we all feel comfortable with the risk that comes with giving somebody one like terabyte of data cap. And then there's the scale beyond that, which is like up to like 100 terabytes of data cap, which today is typically when somebody will either apply through the LDN path or through like a directly to a notary. But waiting like 12 days for that, I think is close to unacceptable. And so then it comes down to what do we actually want to do from a tooling perspective to support those decisions, or how do we want to like change the interaction flow of the system? So not only can we start leveling up like the role of the notary, as we've talked about, to be more of like a guardian than a gatekeeper, but then also enable the notary to be able to make decisions quicker or more at scale. And one of the conversations that came up at the governance call 2 weeks ago was around the idea of having higher quality applications that are coming in that are more region specific or even more country specific. So if we can increase the quality of the applications coming in from the clients, and notaries have slightly more standardized process, then instead of applying to a specific notary, a client could also apply to like a group of notaries that all share that due diligence process, or maybe are from the same region and therefore have the same standards and process. And so that was one of the interesting ideas that came up out of I think it was a later call from 2 weeks ago, if you haven't seen the recording. But it would be great to see if there's other ideas on how we could improve the actual tooling that exists to enable notaries. There's some of you in the call right now, some of you watching the recording. Definitely would appreciate some thoughts, ideally in a GitHub discussion topic. The other sort of areas that we've identified is one is risk mitigation, which is we ensure that we have some sort of on-chain tracking and analytics and auditing of actions that are taking place, both of clients and miners, but also the rest of the Filecoin Plus system or economy, which goes all the way from root key holders to the actual storage providers at the end of it. And so having like basic dashboards, which we do have today, to be honest, we've got 2 pretty solid dashboards that do like analytics on this, but I do think that there's a lot of opportunity to move forward from here. I have a proposal that I'd like to share on this one, but I'm going to save that to the discussion conversation that we'll do later on. But yeah, in general, like Filecoin Plus itself, like we're looking at 40 petabytes of data cap available for allocation. About single digits in petabytes have actually been handed out to clients, and then of that, like a single petabyte roughly has actually been used to make deals. The network is well on track to like close to 10 exabytes of available supply for storage from storage providers. So it'd be great to see one, like as we continue to level up the utilization, like what do we need to track to ensure that we're doing it safely? But then also to just in general, what do we feel as a community needs to be part of the guardrails that we construct so that the program can scale to that order of magnitude, and we still feel comfortable with the kinds of interactions that we have and the empowerment that we do for specific clients in the ecosystem. The general sort of client onboarding UX itself is also a focus area. This one I think is not as high a priority as some of the others right now, at least, or it has not felt that way, but I don't think that's necessarily right. I just think that's happening as a result of us together spending more time on some of these other topics that are a little bit more hot at the moment. But again, ultimately, the success of the Filecoin Plus program, I think, relies substantively on the success of clients that are coming through the pipeline and through the system. And so improving the discoverability of the different moving parts, understanding of tooling, understanding of like how to actually navigate the system, I think will all contribute towards improving the user experience. One of the challenges that we have here right now is like reliably getting like client feedback. I think the places we typically get it are in Slack. People sometimes talk about issues that they're having or ask questions, or in governance calls like this, where sometimes we'll have clients that will join us and talk through their experience and their path. But in general, we should come up with a more systematic approach, I think, whereby clients feel like they have a platform to share their opinions, their feedback, their takeaways from the experience of interacting with the Filecoin Plus system. So I've been trying to do a little bit of thinking on this one. I don't necessarily have a great idea, but I would love to know if anybody in the call does. I especially am looking towards notaries because you are currently at least the primary touch point that clients have with the system. So if you have any thoughts on this, would love to hear them. We can also, of course, go through the route of basically, having a grant for a team that does a bunch of client interviews and screen recordings and watches clients navigate the system for the first time and trying to go get data cap. And that could certainly be one slightly more manual way to do this as well, which I think could be valuable. And then last is on the governance front, which is we have started. We'd like to continue scaling and maturing the processes that we have in the community today. So I think the biggest recent change here has been that we have started to use both GitHub discussions and issues, where discussions are where a lot of the conversation is happening on problems that we care about, or like food for thought, as opposed to like specific solutions to those problems. Where I think we believe generally that discussions are the place where we can have threaded conversations, ideas, and ways in which we can discuss like creative solutions to problems that we align on. And then issues turn into the implementation mechanism for like one of those solutions, where if we're aligned on a solution, turns into an issue, and that's the thing that we use to track the actual implementation, deployment, or changes in process through that. Cool. Talked for a bunch of time. I'm going to give folks a minute to see if there's any reactions to this table or in general to the metrics before. I know I threw out a bunch of prompts for conversation, but I'm not necessarily expecting you to react to all of that right now. Just welcome to mull over it and talk about it in the future. But if you have any thoughts right now, I would love to hear them. Hey, yeah, great question. Is the 35 petabytes from LDN granted or applied? So that's technically like granted via the old process, right? Which is when a client would show up and say, hey, I want at least like a maximum of X petabytes. And then you had the 7 notaries say yes. So it's technically approved, but it's not actually granted in that it's still going to go in like stepwise functions or in like tranches to the client. So it's like a bit of a weird measurement where it's not like necessarily just like how much data cap is available to clients. I think it's more that it's like the clients are, asking for that much data cap are in the pipeline. And generally, like the process will support them.
Yeah, I got a small question, or maybe it's not a question. So after we open the large data notary applications, the number of application goes through our own notary like decreased significantly, because maybe because our like KYC requirement is relatively high, so somehow it's probably higher than the LDN. So yeah, so like not many like clients are applying through our applications right now.
That's really interesting. So not only does it seem to be easier, but also that like the amount of data cap they can get is more.
Yes, so they have no like any motivation to go through our application, or if only if like their amount of like requirements on the data cap is relatively small, they might go through us. But yeah, so the number of like data cap that we granted for the past few months like decreased significantly.
Okay, that's interesting.
Or maybe like if we can like have like more data cap to grant it to single like clients, it might be better. I'm not sure.
Yeah. So I don't necessarily like my response to that, I think, is that I don't necessarily think it's bad for
Yes.
clients to prefer the LDN path, because that is technically a little more efficient, because you now have that like a group, right? Instead of applying to an individual and going back and forth with an individual, you have a group that you're working with, so it's more efficient usually. But if the standard is dropping and like the bar that we hold clients to for the same like grant is much lower, then I think that is a problem. And what we should instead work on, in my opinion, is uh, for the higher threshold or higher risk client applications, we take the time to hold them to the same bar that you would have otherwise held them to if they'd come directly to you. So like what would we need to do to the LDN process, or how do we need to change it in a way that for more data cap, there's more KYC or more trust being established, right? Because it seems inverse to me that like you can go get more data cap with like less trust needing to be established. I think those two things should be relatively correlated.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that I think that would be the prompt for you, I guess, would be what do you think we should do to the application process for that, or like how should we change expectations for clients where like I don't know, maybe they show up for depending on how much data cap they show up for, like I don't know how much it may not matter if they need like 10 terabytes or 50 terabytes, but if they ask for like 5 terabytes, maybe they have to meet like the high bar that like notaries in general agree on, right? So that could probably be like not necessarily an average, but incorporating like most of your high quality due diligence processes in a way that makes sense for most clients.
Yeah, but like if we like hire the standard on the LDN, the time we're gonna spend on the single application gonna take more, and yeah, won't achieve the goal we want to achieve,
Yeah.
like we said before, right?
Yeah. I think begins I think there's two aspects of this. So one is basically there's probably a set of things that we could do that would show up upfront, right? So like as the client is applying for data cap, they should be held to a higher bar. So maybe that application needs to be more robust or needs to expect more from a client. And so that I think would not accrue towards longer time, because that's preparation work that we can expect from a client. As long as we educate them and we're upfront about it and we're public about it, then they shouldn't be caught like that much by surprise. And then there's the follow-up part of it, which is we may want to do additional like back and forth, which is costly. I think there are cases in which the back and forth is required, right? If we see an application that is definitely like suspicious or could be considered like abuse of the system, then I think it's worth tracking that and like spending the time on that. But my gut sense is that a lot of the ones that are coming in today, even if they are like, let's say, fraudulent, we'd probably be able to identify that anyway from like on-chain behavior for how they like handle the next allocation. And because the first allocation is generally like pretty small anyway in like the grand scheme of things, I think for me that the focus turns instead to how do we want to audit their interactions? Like what do we think is considered good and bad like client behavior, based on which we can start to say, hey, like, write some basic automation that just scrapes chain data for that client address and then says, put a flag and says, hey, this looks highly risky, or this client looks like they might be fraudulent. Please do additional investigation before proceeding with more data cap. To me, that is a better mechanism than like going back and forth a lot in front, because going back and forth a lot in front, one, could lead to like bias and like subjective influences to how like decisions happen. It could create like more lag because of just people being busy with things. But I think it's very hard for somebody who is like trying to fraud the system to be long term at least able to hide that. I think example behaviors we've seen in the past, right, where when this has been attempted, is typically been where like clients will show up and then all of a sudden use all the data cap they were given in like one day with only one like storage provider, or they'll do it with like a bunch of storage providers that didn't exist 24 hours before the deal started being made. So new storage provider ID shows up, all of a sudden all the deals in data cap are attributed to these brand new storage providers. So we have like ideas of like how like it's likely that the system could be abused. I think it's worth spending some time like investing on that. And I think one thing that you've been bringing up in the past as well has been like, what do we do with regards to people that claim to be storing a certain kind of data, but we don't actually know what they're storing, right? So I know you talked about having them send you samples of data, for example. Maybe we do need to do that in the case that we start to support like encrypted data at scale, and that just becomes part of like the expectation for a client, which is, send your application and then mail this to this address or something like that. Or we come up with tooling that can use, I don't know, theoretically we could even invent like a proof, right, that looks at encrypted data and tries to identify whether or not it aligns with the expectations by looking at the binaries or the bits within it. So I do think there's ways around this. I think there's ways in which we can much more efficiently hold clients to the same bar. But I think part of this is about not being as reactive upfront, but being more responsive and reactive to like data that we gather about a client over time, because that also gives us more information in the rest of the network and like who's interacting with whom. Like ultimately, this program is about establishing trust. So having ideas on the different actors that exist and how they're related to each other. And then as a result of that, how we track trust across those things will become like, I think, pretty paramount for us. Does that make
I
sense?
agree. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, but I think it's in general, I think the thing that you're calling out, I agree with you that it's a bit of an anti-pattern. And so I think the takeaway here should be that we should figure out how to make that application process more robust, how to ensure that we can start building like audit tracking or automation for on-chain behavior tracking much better, much faster. And then, maybe there are cases in which we have to have more time and more manual verification, and that's okay. And we should set that expectation both within ourselves as a community, but then with clients as well, right? Like if a client's going to show up and ask for 50 petabytes of data cap, maybe it's not so bad. But if they show up and ask for 50 petabytes, then they should expect that it will take some back and forth for this community to feel like they're that trustworthy.
Agree.
Cool. Any other thoughts on this before we jump to the next section? Okay, I guess we keep going. So just wanted to do a quick call out. There's at this link, so this is completely public. Anybody can go here. You can also navigate here by going to the, hopefully you can still see my GitHub, but you can click into the large data sets repo where all the applications are coming in. At the top, there's projects. And if you look at the projects, there's actually something that Galen created. Thank you, Galen, for when you're watching this recording. But it basically tracks like all the incoming applications and where they are in different stages. So you can see what's ready for additional diligence, what's been signed once, what's been approved, and what we want to be tracking on chain for like client behavior and client address, sort of general auditing for deal making and data cap utilization. So this should hopefully help in just like tracking the flow, and generally, if you ever want to get a picture of where the processes are and how like the new flow is working for clients, where they're getting stuck, then I think this is a pretty good sort of indicator of how things are going. Before we jump into this, I do want to spend a second on the general changes to the process and the expectations here. I got a couple of questions from notaries in the last week around like how the new process should influence their actions. And so I just want to spend a second on this one and see if other notaries also had ideas. But in general, the new process is more aimed towards like the same sort of like, evolving notaries. I like this line a lot, right? Like evolving them from being gatekeepers to guardians, or like changing our patterns a little bit from being less of like gatekeeping upfront to instead being oriented around having tracking of actions that are happening on chain after data caps have been granted, after deals have been made. And so that's, I think, the pattern that we want to move towards. And so what that means for notaries that are participating in this process is that, one, there's still due diligence, like there's still an application process, clients are still applying. Even if a multi-sig is created for a client application and data cap is being proposed to be given to that client, that doesn't mean they should receive that data cap, right? There is still an expectation that before you sign that thing, you're at least looking at the application, because nobody else is, because that's still the responsibility of a notary today, which is read the application, or unless the community member has looked and already flagged something, it's probably worth taking a quick scan, at least making sure it makes sense to you, ensuring that it doesn't seem like immediate cause for fraud or concern. And if it does, then call it out in the GitHub issue. Let's have that conversation with the client, give them a chance to provide additional information. But all that, in my opinion, should be happening like right before you even sign like that first allocation. I think once you send that allocation, that's where then it's more about following up to see how that client is doing. And typically the touch point will probably be when that client comes back for more data cap. So I don't know if you guys noticed this, but as per the plan that we had shared, I think a month ago, we're trying to add some automation that can, on behalf of the client, like request additional data cap. So when they get down to about 25% data cap left, it'll post a comment that just says, hey, requesting the next data cap allocation quantity. And that's cool because it reduces the amount of like thinking that a client has to do. It reduces the amount of touch points that they have. It improves their experience. But because the flow still has notaries in the loop, we don't really have that much of a cost of doing that, as long as when that notification comes in and that process is kicked off, there's still some diligence happening. And so this is where I think it's our first sort of actual tactical opportunity to influence the way in which we do audit tracking and the way we like watch for fraud in the system, whereby I think we've shown you screenshots of what this thing is capable for, but it's not that sophisticated, right? What it was doing was just, here are the stats of like how the client made deals. Here's who signed the previous data cap allocation. Here's how much of it ended up with certain storage provider IDs. But beyond that, it's still pretty like primitive. And so it would be cool to see this work, and then as a community start to think about how we need to beef that thing up to like say, hey, like there's a problem or there's no problem, so that the notary load also decreases over time, because all of you also have day jobs and this should be sustainable. We're already looking at I don't know, we've had like 600-700 clients come through the pipeline, and from that, like 3-4 petabytes of data cap have gone out. Like say that was 5 petabytes, especially with LDN, sure, closer to 50 petabytes. But we want to multiply that by 10, right? Like we want to go from 50 to 500. And that, I don't think it's sustainable to imagine that like that means the time that you spend should multiply by 10. So instead, I think it's a combination. The tooling needs to get better. The process needs to get easier. The automation that exists needs to be more useful. And then maybe it's notary responsibilities evolve accordingly, or we get more notaries, or we like change up the expectations in the flow. But that's the kind of like thinking I would like to push each of you on. Cool. So before we dive into discussions, I wanted to ask if there's any clients that are in the call that want to share either like an application that they have open, or questions about the process, or just in general want to pitch their data set or their project to hope to receive data cap. I know there's a couple of people that joined during the call, so I'm not entirely sure who else is here, but I just wanted to ensure that people do have that opportunity. So yeah, if you are a client in the Filecoin Plus ecosystem and want to speak, please raise your hand. Eric, what's up?
Hi, can you hear me, Deep?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Okay, sorry to miss the last government call by the end of the September. So I'm got a few questions about the new LDN's process. So according to the previous page, can you please turn back for the last page?
Yeah, I think it's this one. Oh, it's not. There we go.
Yep. Yep. So first, the clients send the application, and then bots and the government's team, like notary teams, to audit for the application. Then the bots will create the issues on the GitHub, and then the notary would like to have a multi-sign. So according to the our FIP 217, so that's we need 2 notary multi-sign. Am I right?
Yes.
Yeah. And after that, the bot will continue to, for example, the clients seal their data, and the bots will continue to send the second allocation to the client.
Yes.
And then we need another 2 notary to have a multi-sign. And then
That's
step
right.
by step until the project finished, right?
That's right.
Okay, clear. But one more questions. 2 notary will be the first leading 2 notary, or it will be changed random for any notary who join to the project?
Great question. So it can be any notary, and actually the 217 stated that the notary should be different each time. So at least initially, we want more notaries as eyes on the applications. So when that bot requests for additional data cap, it also says like, oh, who signed the previous one, so that in the future, the next signature should be from a different set of notaries. And that generally ensures that like additional due diligence is happening. I don't know if that's the right way to encourage that, but it's certainly one idea. And so I think that's where we're initially starting.
Okay, clear, understand. Thank you.
And then the other thing I wanted to call out is that this whole part, right? The first set where it's like, oh, the bot and the team like audit, that is not like a audit on the actual application. That's audit on the completion of the application. So that's, is the application filled out? Like, is it legible? Is it understandable? Is there anything that is missing from the client? And so that's mostly because the bot checks a bunch of fields to ensure that they've been filled with some text. And then like somebody from the governance team can look and say that, oh, it's actually a sentence. It's not just like random text. And so based on that, it's a reasonable application. It's up to the notaries to decide whether or not they should get data cap.
Understand. Okay, thank you.
Cool, thank you. All right. So these are the open discussions that there are today. There's sort of several ideas that were thrown out by Meg, which are pretty awesome. I think most of that conversation happened in the second governance call last week, because 2 weeks ago, because that's the one that she's able to make, coming from Australia. And then I started this one on like, how do we increase the scope for the automated verification? So yeah, if you haven't already watched the recording or read through these discussion topics, I highly suggest that you take a look. What I would like to do at this point instead is probably, instead of diving into these, like I have a couple of other ideas that I wanted to talk about, and I wanted to spend more time today on open discussion to see if folks have other ideas, especially around like how we level up the system to meet the 6-month goals. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And it looks like Faye has a question in the chat. Just a small suggestion. I think 100 terabytes per week allocation could use an increase. Faye, what do you mean by this?
I think right now the on the documentation it says the euro weekly allocation is 100 terabytes per week, but when I actually use it, it can be really tight. It could send more than 100, especially the total allocation if it's large, like 1 or 2 petabytes. 100, yeah.
So you mean the placeholder text in the application, right?
Like the per top up.
Yeah, so I think when you create a new application.
Yeah, I mean the template says 100 terabytes.
Yeah.
I thought that's a seeding of it.
Yeah. So this I just pasted in the chat from the template.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so you think that should be improved because it's squeezing clients a little bit?
I mean, yeah, like the max total is 5 petabytes. That's like
it could theoretically be 5 petabytes. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Fair enough. Maybe we say.
I mean, if
I
there's
think
no hard
nobody's-
seeding of the weekly, then
Yeah.
it's fine.
No, should we specify that? Maybe we do something like. How about something like this? Something like that, right?
Yeah, cool. Yeah, sure.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's fair. Sort of encouraging clients to work harder, stronger, faster on the network. I think that's good. Fair enough. Cool. So I wanted to actually jump back in conversation to this slide here first as one of the prompts for conversation. This specifically this part, which is that like applications get deleted, and I don't really understand why. Like as I had mentioned when we were going through the content, the data is still there. It's still being tracked. It's available to everybody who's subscribed to the thread. It's available through the dashboards. Of course, not in the same robust manner, but it is. And so I did want to ask, if there's any clients in the chat or if there's any notaries, there's a handful of applications that just get deleted every week. I don't know if this is like a GitHub related issue where people don't like the tooling or are not comfortable using the tooling, or if it's something else. But would love to get some insights on that. I don't really think it matters that much, but I'd be curious to see.
You mean the granted applications, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So like, even if you look at, client onboarding today, if you look at the repo, there's, let's see, if I just do granted. Oh, now it's at 211. Interesting. Maybe I was missing something in browser, but anyway, I've definitely seen that happen. And then the other indicator of that is probably that, like, if you just look at the total number of issues that exist, right? We're looking at 769, but we're at number 970. And these only increment by 1. And so theoretically, that means close to 200 have been removed. And of course, I think a lot of these can be mistakes and duplicates. But it's weird that the granted number would not be going up, right? Even if it was 211, we know that new ones have been approved in the last week. So it's still net down. And yeah, like I mentioned, I think it's confusing because all that info is still tracked. And so I was wondering if anybody has any insights. I know there's certain countries and regions that have restrictions on GitHub usage. I don't know if that is part of it. I don't know if it's because people feel like, oh, once the process is done, they can just like delete the issue. But the standard process in GitHub is typically like, yeah, the issue just gets closed and that's it, right? Like we can still leave the issue up. And so maybe it's like a missing like education thing. But yeah, if you have any ideas, let me know on this one. Because it's always better to have like the audit trail in the open. Of course, we can find different ways to publish it because all of that is still documented and stored in databases. Cool. The other thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about was specifically around like actually also this slide, which is that I really liked this work that Andrew and his team had done. I don't know if Andrew is here at the moment. Looks like he actually is, which is great.
Morning.
Which is around like just tracking like notary statistics, not necessarily because it's meant to have people compete with each other, but more because it was like a really like good indicator of like reliability, and also influenced like client decisions in the past, where it was like, oh, like I can take a quick look at this table and figure out like where should I be going if I need data cap in a pinch, or where should I be going if I can get responsiveness. And I think that doesn't create the right incentives necessarily, because there's still like differences in how we do due diligence across notaries. But I do think it pushes the conversation of how can the process become a little bit more efficient and effective, and also in general like a little bit more standardized. So to Hao's point earlier, right? Like how do we ensure that the quality stays high and the standard is high for applications that are coming into the system from clients are useful and interesting and trustworthy. I think it would be great to see this sort of leverage a little further and used as like insights into our system and insights into our process to figure out what we're doing. So in general, there've been some interesting advancements in like the DAO world. I don't know how much of this you guys are following, but there was this like pretty cool. So Gitcoin, I'm sure you guys have heard of, but JB, who many of you know, has been spending a lot of time thinking about that space, and like shared this website with me, which is pretty cool. Stewards.eth.limo. Let me see if I can pull that up for you. So not necessarily saying that this is what we need, but I do think this is a pretty cool. Okay, so the site doesn't seem to be loading for me at the moment, so I'm gonna drop it in the chat. But it's like this like pretty like neat looking like dashboard of sorts, but more along the lines of like who are the people that are participating in this DAO, how do they participate, how do they allocate their time, what does it look like. And then Meg, one of the discussion topics she's been pushing is around like notary like SLAs, right? Like how do we have levels for how much time somebody has to actually commit? What are the expectations that are fair for their commitment, and how much progress can a client expect to make? And so I've been thinking about like ways in which we can sort of level up some of what Andrew's already built out in terms of tracking notary performance and notary statistics into something that might look a little bit more interactive and look closer to this. So yeah, if this is something you're interested in, either influencing or working on, I would love to hear it. I'll probably share like a more concrete proposal in the coming day or so in GitHub itself to get your thoughts on it, and then maybe we can put out a grant and find a team that would be interested in working on this. But I think this could be a pretty cool step towards us acting like pushing the notaries to act more like this group of guardians that work together to set policies for like automation that ultimately results in a very good client experience. Yeah. Hey, just so you know, I can't even open it right now. So I think that there's just a lot of traffic maybe going to the site. And so it's just having issues to process it. Yeah. So yeah, I might have saved a screenshot somewhere when I was like just thinking about it. Let me see if I can pull it up in some way for you folks. Let's see. Okay, nice. I think I'm able to do that. So that means if I share the screen, yeah, let me show you a screenshot. There you go. So this is what it sort of looks like. Obviously, it's got a bunch of like styling at the top and stuff, but it's like tiles basically where it's like, oh, here's this person, they've been a steward in this DAO since a certain date. This is how engaged they are, like how much they vote, what their participation looks like. So I think this is like a cool stepping stone to both forcing the conversation of like how do we expect the notary role to change, but also like a more interactive and interesting manner of exploring like in general like TTD, governance participation, increasing presence, increasing I think participation in general in the system, and then it's like getting clear on the expectations that people are setting for themselves so that we can then set them at a community-wide level as well. So yeah, it's a cool idea. It's food for thought. If you have any reactions to that, please let me know.
For this kind of DAO, there's tokens, right? To wait the voting weight.
Yeah, pretty sure. I think that's where the voting weight, like the weight parameter, comes from. Probably the proportion of like effectively like the equity that you have in the DAO.
Yeah. Okay. So actually, I think just 2 weeks ago, I had a talk with a project called SkillWorth, which was also like invested by Protocol Labs. They were from Tachyon acceleration programs,
Okay.
and they're like doing some like DAO toolings, and they're like doing some kind of like non-transferable NFT. So and they can like support some like on-chain data analytics to support the whole DAOs to make some decisions, something like that. Maybe we can like ask them, or because since you guys have already invested in them, so maybe we can do some collaboration.
Yeah.
I'm not
What
sure.
was the name of the project?
Skill wallet. SKILL wallet. The founder is an Italian.
Oh yeah, I see it's the .id domain. Is it this one?
Yes.
That's kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, instead of needing to have a governance token, you have this.
Yeah, because some kind of IDs in the some reputation, because like reputation can be used as like a voting weight, right? Yeah, so you can use as like maybe their toolings can help, because clearly our DAO there will be no token, right? Ideally.
Ideally.
Yes.
Well, I mean that could change if we needed to, but I think it would make it significantly more complicated.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it might help. I'm not sure. So
this is awesome. Yeah, definitely worth taking a look. Has anybody else heard of this?
Yeah, I know the team that has been doing that for a while. They've done a lot of kind of good experiments at the different hackathons that PL has hosted. I don't know where Skill Wallet is development-wise these days, though. But they'd be good resources to tap into knowledge-wise.
This is great. Awesome. What do you guys think of that, like dashboard type thing? Worth making?
Well, it actually leads me to another question, which so like when we applied to be a notary, we applied as textile to be a notary, but just like many DAOs, and that dashboard is individual driven.
Yeah.
So I wanted to introduce Anya from my team, who's going to help me as a notary.
Nice.
So welcome, Anya. But it actually leads me to the question: how are we thinking about notaries having multiple people?
Yeah, as in like entities that are like, it's like at the organization level, but then you have more than one person in there, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's a couple of ways that we can do this. So one is we do the model that you've sort of been following at Textile, which is notaries are actually multi-sigs in and of themselves for like an organization. And then you have multiple signers on that with a threshold of one. So you have somebody in the organization that's worthy or is aware enough of the process to be able to make that signature. There's a second approach where, there's a single, like it doesn't have to be multi-sig, it could just be an F1 address, but that's attributed to an organization. And then it's the organization's responsibilities to care about like key sharing, etc. But that's like the presence on chain. There's also a third way, which is that instead of having like organizations be notaries, we have individuals be notaries. And I think we've kind of strayed away from that third one. And I think for good reasons, which is generally that like the ecosystem is pretty early. We have like a couple of like very major players from like an organization standpoint, either because they have high presence in the ecosystem from the work they're doing, or because of the money they've invested, or their presence on the mining front and general like provisioning of data center front and investing. And so like disproportionate leverage provided to early players is probably was like something that we thought would not be like a great outcome. And I think that's why the original like design that ZX proposed in the FIP was like, oh, like an organization should have one. But then based on that, we've also had interesting conversations on like, organizations and their like wholly owned subsidiaries applying to be notaries. And that's led to some interesting edge cases as well, right? Like where like theoretically the same parent organization has like 3 or 4 notaries that are like interacting, but each of those actually are beholden to a different like registered company, and each of
Okay.
those have their own like wallets
So-
and their own like token
So
grants
this
and
is
their own
really,
like yeah.
this is really interesting because you actually lead to another question I have, but quick TLDR on that one is I'm going to be onboarding Anya more and more to our things. So like getting her to be the person tagged in our issues, for example, so that she can review applications will be cool. Anyway, so I wanted to introduce her so people got used to seeing that name around. And then, but you actually lead me to another thing that's on my mind, which is cool that people are thinking about this being a DAO. I'm a big advocate of that. And I know that I've spoken to you and JV about that a few times. But I have a little DAO drum that I like to beat, which basically says, if you look at the way that DAOs operate from the outside, if you're trying to evaluate how sort of buttoned up the DAO is and how effective they're going to be, a really great tool is to look at how their documentation is. So if you go, my like case example of that is if you go and look at the Bankless DAO, if you look at their wiki, it's very easy to jump into that and figure out what you want to figure out and learn how that organization is organized, like who's taking on what roles, who's doing what. And what you were just saying about this, this kind of 3 forks or 4 forks in individuals versus organizations, I'm not certain it's documented anywhere for us. And part of that makes me think that currently Phil Plus is a little hierarchical coming from Protocol Labs, because not in a bad way, you had to bootstrap it, but like when you come to these meetings, you have to run them every time, you know, like I don't think you necessarily like that either. But a little bit of that, I wonder if, so we do this at Textile already, we're not a DAO, but we started to experiment with how we organize our system as a DAO internally. And I wonder if Phil Plus could be doing more of that, and possibly it starts with documentation and the adoption of guilds. So not every Phil Plus notary needs to be involved in every decision, but when we decide, when we decide that we want to figure out, like your open discussion, possibly there's a guild that's responsible for figuring out how we make onboarding simpler and faster. And there's a smaller group that's just going to go work together every week to come up with a plan and then come back to the bigger group to propose it. And everybody kind of signs off or votes on it, makes it happen. And I think we're getting big enough at this point that this, like everybody all helping to make the decisions, is either going to lead to no decisions happening or PL making all the decisions just to keep it moving forward, which isn't what you want either. So anyway, I'd love to like keep this discussion if you're interested in it, and I can share some of what we're up to, but just trying to like get this moving, I think, towards the DAO idea would be really cool.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think in general also like transitioning some of this stuff, at least Galen isn't here today, but he's been running like for the last 3 months or so, sort of more of the DRI for this stuff, because I think it's better for it to lie in the foundation. I'm just stepping in from today. But everything else you said, I completely agree with. I think it's definitely
none of it's a bad thing. I didn't mean any of it as a criticism. It's just kind of the state we're in at the moment, which is good because it's moving forward. But I'm just trying to think like, if we do want to move towards that stuff, like could we be doing things to organize internally and document internally and create like focus groups of work that are responsible for taking on functions of the Phil Plus pseudo DAO internally, like all those things. So
yeah, I definitely think we should continue having that conversation. Thanks for sharing.
cool.
I think it might be worth, if you could share a little bit more about like how you're structuring some of your organization and what we could learn from that and apply here. But also, as was pointed out earlier, it's not like we're going to have like our own like token or obvious incentivization mechanism. So we're probably going to need to think a little bit more about that front as well. So I think those are definitely like good conversations to keep going. Andrew, if you'd be down to share that stuff either in a GitHub discussion, or maybe we can have you share that more as like a dedicated topic of conversation at the next call or something, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, happy to. We'll have to check next call timing wise, but yeah, happy to. Actually, one thing that really pops in my mind that we might be missing out on is like the way that DAOs organize their planning over the more midterm. Most of them seem to be aligning on the language of seasons. So like a season is 2 or 3 months long and has KPIs and objectives that you're like trying to innovate towards.
Yeah.
And having that kind of alignment as a group, like, hey, what are we focused on for the next 3 months? And then like letting the people go off and work on different projects to move that needle might help us. But at the same time, maybe Phil Plus is pretty static, so there's not so much innovation happening, but just an idea. But anyway, so in answer to your question, I'm happy to share more down the road.
Cool. All right. Thank you so much. I think we're a couple of minutes over. Thank you all for sticking with it today. Appreciate you making the time. Of course, part 2 of the same agenda and similar conversation will probably happen in several hours from now. And then both of these will be shared online on YouTube. So if you're watching the recording, great. If you're here live, thank you for making it. And hopefully we'll see you at the next one. Thank you. All right, everybody, welcome to part 2 of the Notary Governance call for October 12th. And for some of us in this call, it's October 13th, which is great. And on the agenda today, we've got a couple of items. First thing you'll notice is that I'm the one saying this stuff and not Galen. And so he wasn't able to make it today, unfortunately, so I'm here in his stead. But yeah, hopefully we'll have him back for the next one because he's certainly a lot more interesting and makes a more compelling argument than I do for a lot of these things. But here we go. On the metrics front, generally flatlined. Not really surprising. It's kind of what we're seeing, where because we're aggregating data over such an extensive period of time, and lately client applications have been coming in more from the LDN flow as opposed to directly to notaries. A lot of the TTD metrics are sort of stable, and so as you can see, there's not substantive change over the last 2 weeks between a lot of these time to data cap metrics. I did want to call out that we now have a view where we separate the funnel for stuff that's going directly to clients from manual verification from a notary versus to a client via an LDN. So that's on the stats page of the dashboard that I typically pull these screenshots from. The salient takeaway here is that in general, though, we're pretty comprehensively looking at about 30% of the data cap or 35% of data cap that's being given to clients is being used in deals. I think I called this out last time, but we've crossed 1 petabyte of data onboarded onto the network through data cap and through Filecoin Plus, so that's pretty awesome. Excited to hit many more milestones of this sort and at many a higher magnitude as well. The general amount of data cap out there is roughly around 3+ petabytes. Measuring that's a little tricky, as we mentioned in the past, because the LDN flow now follows like a different mechanism for how data cap could be considered given to a client, because that number is otherwise like closer to 40, 45 petabytes in total. Meg has a question in the chat. Is there a stat for total active Filecoin clients? There probably is. It is not on our dashboard. The place I typically look at for stats is there's like file.app. Maybe that has something. I don't know if you can still see my screen.
Yeah, I've been looking at that. I just it's just a question. We're raising more capital, and it's good to know how many verified 5+ clients. I just wondered if we could size the whole market. And I'm starting a piece with IDC soon, so I just wanted to know if you could direct me.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's not that difficult to figure out, to be honest. File.app seems not to be loading for me at the moment. Oh, there we go. Clients, there you go.
Well, see, that's different to what I've seen.
Where are you looking?
I'll tell you. Keep going, and then I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so that's the number that I see. Bear in mind, though, as you continue to pitch this to people, I don't think that the client number itself is such an excellent indicator of usage of the network, because I think we're starting to see some consolidation around deal brokers and deal intermediaries. Like a lot of clients are now coming in and using the same like deal broker to do deals on the network. So they'll use something like Estuary or like the Textile Bidbot. And so the way that shows up on the chain may just be as like the Textile Bidbot account or Estuary's account, as opposed to the numerous clients that might be using it. So that's worth flagging as well as you continue to present this content and bring in lots of cool people. Yeah, so that number, Meg, I think that is a Filecoin Plus specific dashboard.
Well, it says 751 verified clients.
Yeah, so I think the difference in how they're measuring this thing is that, yeah, and I see 801.
Yeah, right.
The difference is that these are clients that have probably received data cap, whereas that storage page is the number of clients that have actually then made deals with it.
Got it.
Yeah,
Got it.
so like
Okay.
active clients from Filecoin Plus are probably like, you know, assuming that 30% holds true, that means it's like 200 to 300. So
Yeah,
then,
got it.
yeah,
Okay.
there's an additional several hundred that are making deals that are not. So if you want a specific number of active deal making clients, I think this is a better indicator. The Filecoin Plus is indicative of you know, maybe latent demand that will hopefully soon activate. Yeah, this is storage.filecoin.io.
Just drop that in. Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Sweet.
Yeah.
With that, continuing on with the stats, direct notary activity. The client onboarding repo as of last night, I believe, has 46 open issues. 26 new applications came in the last week, roughly low 30s in the last 2 weeks. The state granted is 202. So this is actually wrong. I fact checked myself in the previous call and it was at 211, but in an effort to keep the content the same across the calls, we see that it's at, you know, it's going up. But what we are noticing is that there are certain clients that will delete an application after it's been approved. And so there was a little bit of conversation this morning and trying to figure out like what the motivation for that is, considering like the applications are well tracked, the content and the back and forth is available both via email to the people who have subscribed to the topic, but also in general, like because our dashboards track all the activity, there's no real good incentive for a client to like delete an application. And so if you have any ideas on why you think clients might be deleting the applications, I'd love to hear them. We're trying to figure out like what the pattern is and what we might be missing in terms of how we're educating clients in the system about like their use of GitHub. Two other percentages worth calling out. So about 62% of applications coming into the repo actually get a response from a notary. And then about 20 out of 73 applications this past month receive data cap. And so we're decently selective, like 25%. It's good to see that it's not 0, and it's great to see that it's not 100 as well, which means some aspect of due diligence is definitely still working, even though we may not have standardized those processes across different notaries. On the right, this is the table that we haven't looked at in a little bit, but I wanted to start bringing back. This is the original analysis that Andrew Hill did, where he looked at everybody that's ever been assigned. So some of the handles here are not actually notaries, like I am Super Mario, and I'm not a notary. But I have closed 2 issues, which I used when we did the first notary office hours after the elections to show some of you how to use the tooling with GitHub and the bot. But the rest of it is still pretty useful, which is it's a good indicator of actual, you know, data cap allocating notaries in the way that they are providing data cap, how responsive they are, how long it often takes for them to make a decision, and roughly how their decisions are made as a percentage. Generally speaking, like a lot of like numbers between like 8 and 15, which, you know, as we've talked about in the past, we'd love to motivate and see go down, especially as we talk about Filecoin itself being a more mature and approachable client onboarding experience for legit users that want to use it, who might be comparing their experiences to the Web 2 world. This gives us an opportunity to really level up. And this is probably the place where a lot of their client experience will be impacted. And so working on ways in which we can improve the time to data cap metric is definitely a priority for us, I think. On that note, pivoting into some of the goals that we set ourselves. So we talked about the 6-month goals almost 2 governance calls ago. So that's 4 weeks ago, which really means at this point there might be 5-month goals. We might want to give ourselves like a date instead of calling them the 6-month goals. I was considering just starting to call them like Q1 or like March, if that sounds good to you folks, or if you have any better suggestions, I'd love to hear them. but yeah, focus area on a focus area by focus area basis. The first one being volume. We're still in that like 40 to 50 petabyte range. We're expecting that like we'll get a lot more applications in the rest of the year with the new flow, but also we sort of mentioned this at the last call, but would love to get more conversation maybe in the later segment of this call around how we can improve data cap availability and data cap abundance. So whether that's adding more notaries or giving more data cap to the notaries or adding more data cap in circulation, regardless of the mechanism by which it's actually introduced into the Filecoin Plus economy. And then there's general like BD efforts in supporting them as well. So Filecoin Gravity is one such program, but I know that like several of you are also involved in leading business development for the network and onboarding clients that are bringing on projects at a much larger scale in different regions around the world. So ensuring that they have a viable path via Filecoin Plus and a friction minimized path via Filecoin Plus. And so I know Jonathan has a topic on this one, so I'll ask him to hold that till as soon as we get through this section. Next up is speed or TTD. So ensuring that like clients that we do decide to support via Filecoin Plus do receive data cap like quickly. So we've talked about setting goals where in the 0 to 1 petabyte range, that's like almost instantaneous or at least less than an hour. And then in the 1 to 100 petabyte range, you want to anchor on it being less than a day. And so I had prompted a discussion, I believe 2 weeks ago, on how we could build out support for automated verification to the point where we could trust it at the 1 terabyte range. So there was a good amount of conversation on that last time. I'm happy to continue that as well. But also in general, like thinking of ways in which tooling can be created for you as notaries to feel like, one, upfront, you're getting the information that you need to decide whether or not a client is legit, or two, in your due diligence process, there are ways in which we can like augment or supplement the content that you're using to make a decision to make that even more efficient for a client. And then third is, of course, this aspect that in general, we're motivating notaries to be more like guardians of the network as opposed to gatekeepers. And with that comes the watch what happens once a client onboards, as opposed to needing to make all these decisions up front and like front loading the friction for a client onboarding onto the network. The other three areas that we've identified is risk mitigation, which is we need to have good audit tracing as a community, especially as it pertains to the previous point. If we get a little faster and looser with data cap, then ensuring that we've got checks and balances in place is paramount to ensuring that the system stays stable and the network stays safe. So we're at 2 dashboards. I've seen a couple of proposals actually float by on different kinds of analysis that could happen, or the creation of additional like dashboards. I'd love to chat about those if anybody has ideas, or if anybody here wants to support the creation of additional data points or data analysis that could help with the system. On the client onboarding front, goals here are generally to improve discoverability of the program, like clear calls to action for clients that are coming through the pipeline, so they know exactly what to do and how to do it and what their expectations should be to ensure that they're successful in onboarding onto the network. A bit of a gap here that I wanted to call out is we don't really have a super structured way of getting feedback from clients today. Most of the feedback that we get is like ad hoc, either in Slack, where people will share their thoughts in a Filecoin Plus channel, or through calls like this, where we often have clients who come and are open to actually conversing with us or sharing the content in chat. So I guess another prompt for the notaries is you are some of the stakeholders in the system that interact the most with clients. If you have ideas on how we could do reach out for the entire community, or lessons that we can get from the clients you've worked with that would be useful to share with the community, I'd love to have that conversation. One of the things we've thought about proposing in the past has been like the more traditional like UX researcher based approach, where we could like provide a grant to a team who like interviews a bunch of clients, watches them onboard onto the network, and like records that and gets insights from like a product design perspective and a UX perspective on like what their takeaways are or how it feels. But maybe there's like lower lift ways even, or ways that you're already doing and other notaries or other folks in the system are not as aware of, that might be worth sharing. And last, and certainly not least, is sort of maturing and scaling our governance processes. So not only in terms of taking into account opinions, but also just in general scaling to support more decision makers, more community engagement, and sort of pushing ourselves in this like DAO like direction that we often talk about. We're at the point where we're now using GitHub a little bit better, but that's just, you know, a minor improvement. I think we do have ways to go in terms of improving engagement and improving participation, and yeah, like moving towards DAO. And so there's a lot of conversation on that this morning. And so I'd love to share some of the takeaways from that conversation. Part of which was I've been thinking about proposing the creation of some kind of like notary, like leaderboard or stats board that's similar to what a lot of DAOs do when they look at like members that participate. So I'll show you an example of this and we can chat about it in the open discussion part of the call. I did want to call out one awesome thing that Galen added, which is at this link. You can actually get here by just going to the large datasets repo. And up here, you've got projects. If you click into this, there's something called LDN tracking. And this sort of tracks all the incoming applications and where they are. So if they're ready for additional diligence, waiting for a second notary to sign, or if the application's been approved, it's like a one-spot view. I do think it currently requires manual updating. So we might want to come up with a mechanism where via labels, we can track these things. I'm not sure how feasible that is, but it's a nice snapshot into like where we are with like people that are onboarding via this path and the progress that we're making as a community. Thank you, Galen. Shout out for doing that.
It looks good.
Yeah, awesome. And then I think the last thing I wanted to touch on briefly was on expectations around the LDN process. I got a couple of DMs in the last couple of weeks around like what a notary is supposed to be doing. And I just wanted to call out that like nothing really has changed. The only difference is that we're not gating on having 7 notaries say yes, but every single allocation, notaries still have to say yes, at least the way it stands today. And so there's still an expectation that as a notary, you are responsible for doing diligence. So I think that people got confused by this sentence up here, which is like bot and governance team audit for completion. But literally all we're doing is we have a bot that says, have all the fields on the form being filled out. And then, you know, somebody takes a pass and says, oh, are there actual like legible English responses to those questions? And that's it. There's no like opinionation happening other than when a notary comes in and then expresses an opinion on the legitimacy of an application. And so as a notary, I think this is like certainly like you even using like this tracking thing to look at this column is a good use of your time if you have an extra few minutes on a Friday evening, I don't know, sitting at your favorite microbrewery 8 minutes away from your house or something like that. You always have the opportunity to pop in and take a look at client applications that exist and seeing if any of them are worthy of getting any data cap. Cool.
Just a question, Deep. So is it, we have moved to 2 notaries, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you don't really need a lead anymore because there's just 2?
So this one I think is a bit of an open question. The original proposal that Galen had in that issue was that we didn't actually need a lead, but part of that proposal was also that the 2 would always cycle. So it wouldn't be that the 2 sign every allocation, but that 2 can only sign 1 consecutive allocation at a time. So suppose like Notary A and Notary B sign the first allocation for client 1. The next time client 1 needs data cap, like we have a bot that will say, hey, client 1's running out of data cap, here's the next allocation. Notary A and B can't actually sign that. And so the idea is that because we can cycle people, we also cycle diligence and get in additional perspectives from the community. And that way, each consecutive app at least is bringing in some fresh eyes. I do think that we may want to still consider having a lead notary, because I do think it had upsides. So Meg, I was actually thinking that depending on some of the topics I wanted to propose based on the conversation this morning, plus like the direction that we might want to take your notary leveling idea into, we might still want to consider having like somebody from like a higher tier of engagement, for example, still be responsible for like shepherding like one of these clients. Not entirely sure how that would play out. I think that's like an open conversation that we should have together.
Sure.
Cool. Lots of stuff sort of talked straight for like 20 minutes. Hopefully a lot of it landed. With that, I wanted to, open it up for open discussion. There's a lot of topics that I think we do need to discuss, but I was going to first give the mic to Jonathan because I know he had something he wanted to share, and then we can take it from there.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Deep. So this kind of question, I'm coming from the Holon storage provider side of the business. So this is really a question for yourself and Danny. We've started chatting to clients on how we can store their data. Now, the key thing that our clients are looking for is their data to be more reliable, more redundant, and more robust, right? Those are the three things that we need to deliver over Amazon to take their cold storage backups and then to use us. Now, interestingly, it doesn't need to be that much cheaper than Amazon because it's robust and redundant, and they get this feeling that, yeah, you know, if Amazon turn them off, then they don't know what to do, right? It's just Amazon storing it. But if it's across 4 or 6 providers, they get more reassurance as a business that they'll be able to access their data. Now, getting data into Filecoin, moving it from them to us is, you know, another problem. But the way I've kind of looking at this problem is we'll create these IPFS nodes across the world. We'll probably have 4 or 6. Our providers will upload the data to this IPFS node. Think of this like as a monthly backup service. The data that we'll get there will be unencrypted. So Holon and somebody else or a notary will check that that data is fine and then there's nothing untoward in that data. We will then encrypt that data and put it into 2 pieces, and then we will give those 2 pieces to 4 or 6 storage providers across the world. Now, that is the simplest process that I can see to sell data storage, and I'm currently looking for partners that are enterprise providers across the world to help facilitate these deals. Now, what I'm really coming here today and asking is there any blockers that you guys can see for me, for this for this process not to happen? You know, encryption, picking my own storage providers, making sure they're enterprise. I just want to double check this before I kind of get to the nitty gritty next week.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. You know, in general, in the community, we have this challenge on like figuring out how we want to level up and build standards around like checking for data that will eventually be encrypted. And I think that I'd love to hear from the notaries. I know Meg is here, though might be slightly biased, but at least Danny and Binga are here as well. We'd love to hear like what they have to say about that being a viable process. My initial opinion is I think that's like fairly reasonable. The only thing I would ask is, once it's added to IPFS, is it bad that it was added to IPFS? Because if somebody gets a hold of those CIDs, then it is visible to anybody that goes to a gateway and tries to pull that content. Like, what does the risk actually look like? Is that something a client would say yes to?
Sorry, can you say that again? Sorry.
Yeah, so when you upload something to IPFS, like you get a CID, right? And technically, nothing on IPFS is actually like private if you know what the CID is. So if you uploaded unencrypted data there, theoretically that is like then releasing it to the public. Like, agree that it won't survive long term, and agree that people probably won't find it and specifically go and chase it down. But it is technically like a violation of like somebody who might have like PII data or private data. And so I just wanted to check that your client would be okay with that, because it's effectively the same almost, other than like the permanence aspect of it. It's very similar to just making a deal with that data directly, right? Because you have put it on the internet and it's not encrypted.
Okay, cool. So because we work fast over here, how about I give Danny the encryption key so he can check the data, and it's encrypted on IPFS. So another notary checks that data is fine. Yeah, we're happy. And then we split it into 2 and give it out to the storage providers.
So I want to just clarify something. So with this, when you're describing this process, are you envisaging it interacting with the Filecoin Plus system, so that you'd be putting this data for your clients online, but you'd also be requesting data cap for those services. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So the key thing first is they put their data on the IPFS node. Okay, the client has 1 petabyte of encrypted data. Cool. Then somebody checks that data. Okay, we're happy. Then Holon will help them through the data cap process and make sure that they get everything they need. Once that's done and dusted, then we can move it from our IPFS node to our Filecoin, because you've really got to add the IPFS at the beginning, because they want to get rid of their data as quickly as possible, and it takes a long time to move from A to B. So if you add that IPFS part, you can kind of like soften the whole process by making it a bit more seamless.
So I think something that might be useful is that I don't think, and others can jump in here, that the notaries really have to see the data itself. The thing that we're trying to establish is the bona fides of the person providing the data. And pretty much explicitly, we're trying to make sure that one storage provider isn't sort of benefited by virtue of sort of creating a fake agreement, right? Where there isn't any real data at the bottom of it. It's just there purely to benefit the storage provider. So as far as that goes, really the stuff that the notaries do is more due diligence on the organizations themselves. So if you provided us with that information, right? The thing that would speed this up the most is that you, as part of your contract, just wrote up a description of the company, description of the data, very similar to the data cap requests we have here. Then, and this is probably something we can discuss, whether we should be giving the data cap to you or we should be giving the data cap to them. I think it's probably you because you'll be the person who's actually arranging the deals, and that's the path that we've done with other similar projects like S3 and NFT storage. But we don't need to see we don't need to check the data itself. I guess the two things we need to check are bona fides of the person, the customer, and some insight into what the contracts are with multiple storage providers, because one of the clues that we look for is that there is one deal exclusively going to one or a cohort of providers. Is that useful?
Yeah, that's great, and I think that's so. Yeah, that would be great, because ultimately, if Holon has a data cap, it's easier for our clients. You know, I've gone into these sales meetings with clients, and they're like, "Yeah, so why should I use Filecoin?" And I'm like, you know, X, Y, Z. It's decentralized. It's more robust. But then I get to the CTO, and they go, "Yeah, great, but I just do one click, and it gets stored in Glacier, and it's cheap." Like so I'm competing with a one-click cheap service. So I need to create a 1 or 2 click cheap service, but it has to be more robust. It has to be more redundant, and it has to be more reliable, right? So yeah, that sounds better to me. Look, I think the two key things are, we are happy to at any moment allow a notary to vet the information, because that is important to the network. So that's a key thing. That's one of the key things that I think we should allow. And you're right, if we could get the data cap through Holon storage provider business, that's going to be a lot easier for our clients. And also the clients we're going after are like education companies that are universities and, you know, like media companies, right? So they've got lots of data and they're a $100 million business, right? So it's easy for us to just point at them and go, yeah, there they are.
So I would say, I mean, one of the things that sort of, if somebody else wants to speak, please put up your hands, because and somebody stop me, because I'll talk forever. One of the things that I really do understand what you're saying here about there's a degree of price. The price isn't the most compelling part of this, or compelling part of an alternative. And the Filecoin Plus process for the provider, for the client, Right now, its primary incentive is around price, right? But there is this interesting discontinuity, right, where the price for many storage providers right now, if you from Filecoin Plus, is free, is zero price. And we don't know how long that will continue. It has to do with the crypto economics of the whole system. But one of the things in conversations I've had with large-scale academic or educational providers is that is not just a difference in kind of degree, in quantity. It's actually a really big difference in the total system. In that they can use the system, like if we streamline the process so you don't have to do another click to plead that you are a real organization, you can still store on the network relatively cheaply. But we also have this thing which lets you store for a very large amount of data for free. And so those two things, those are two different offerings in some ways, right? Like here's an offering where you can store this data in this robust and reliant way. And here's this offer where you can store this in a reliant and robust way, but also you can decide how much you want to store, right? Like you don't, for 18 months, right? You don't have any limits on that apart from how quickly you can get the data up. So it might be better for your considerations to think about it in terms of quickness. We can get you on the network like super quickly, but with this little bit of paperwork, we can even offer this part of it for free. Again, like the thing there is because nothing's for free, right? You have to store and you have to distribute and you have to send the data, but it really changes the marginal cost of storing more data.
We're never going to provide our clients free data storage, because at some point we have to charge them, and going from 0 to 1 is hard work, but where going from 1 to 2 is easy, right? And also, you know, you start talking about free data storage, you know, people just laugh at you, right? Like and also my costs for humans to facilitate this service, i.e. one of the questions was, who do I call up when I want my data and something's not working, right? And that has to be Holon and Holon engineers, right? And that costs me a lot of money because, you know, manpower is very expensive in Australia. So we won't sell it for free. We're going to double down on robustness, reliability, and redundancy, and we're just going to do it with enterprise miners. And yeah, we just need to make the process as seamless as possible. And that's kind of like the first way. You know, I was talking about the encryption because I know about 6 months ago, you know, that encryption was a big question, but I just, you know, we're just happy to open up that data so people can check it if they need to, is the key here, I think. And yeah, just wanted to get your thoughts on this as well, you know, anything that I might need to think about as we kind of go through this process. Okay, is that okay with you, Deep? So what I'll do is I'm going to go away. I'm going to keep trying to sell data storage as much as possible. I think I'm going to have about 3 clients by the end of the month, which puts me in a predicament where I need to find my enterprise storage providers, because at the moment I've only got 2. So I need, well, us and somebody else. So I need 2 more. Once I've got them, then I'm going to chat to Meg and I'll get her support to help me write everything up and then feed it out into the community and for the next steps.
Yeah. So I think that like, it's definitely fine with me. I don't actually really have a say in this. So if Notaries is supporting you like Danny, then that's all that actually matters. I think that in general, it will be, the only thing that I would say is it's likely that we should probably push the entire community to have some sort of standard consensus on this topic as well. So you can bake in some kind of predictability into this, like, because there's a chance that like other notaries are like, oh, like we do want to see like a sample of the data, or you have to ship us, like, cause at least in China, that does happen where, for example, the Fenbushi notary requests that some of the data is sent to them like on a pen drive via like courier, right? So you may want to just set expectations for yourself that you may have to like pivot based on the needs of specific notaries, as the ecosystem itself is a little young and we haven't yet standardized these processes. But I do think that in the near term, or hopefully in the next few months, we will have a much more like standardized process by which you'll have consistency in how you need to keep proving the same thing. So that's one flag. And then the second flag is for your mining needs, that channel that you're asking me about, feel free to abuse that to be like, hey, like I need reliable people here, because that is where I've added all the people I've worked with in the past for the exact same reason, and others are doing the same. And so feel free to leverage that working group for a base pool of like geo-distributed, like reliable storage providers across the world.
Perfect. Cool. I appreciate your time today and allowing me to talk. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. Cool. So I wanted to pivot into some of the other open discussion topics. One of the ones that I wanted to talk through was, as we start to move towards DAO leanness and DAOhood, we also look at aspects of like how the community actually interacts and what we get done as a group. And there was actually this Twitter thread from Gitcoin DAO, which is one of the more popular and prevalent ones, where they talked about how they've been tracking steward participation. And so I wanted to show you this thing. It's kind of cool. But the idea here is basically everybody that participates in that DAO is like on this dashboard where you can see like, who they are, since when they've participated, what their engagement typically looks like if they're committed to specific work streams. And this part, I guess, like not as relevant, which is the voting weight aspect, because like we don't like have our own currency that we use. But it was interesting to look at like this kind of mechanism whereby I think the first thing it would do is it would provide a lot of like insight into like how we're proceeding on some of our metrics, such as like time to data cap and things like that, and how individual notaries are performing with regards to that stuff. And the second thing I think that it would do would be it would start to provide the specific data that we would need to action some of the proposals, like Meg's idea on having different commitment levels or service levels for notaries. Because once you have that data in front of you and you can observe it, it's also much easier to start to figure out what the natural patterns are or where the lines are that might need to be drawn. And I think it also helps set both the standard, but also the expectation for people that may want to be notaries in the future. And, just in general, leveling up the presence that we have for the notary role in the system. What are reactions to that or thoughts to that?
I like it. I think it's good. It's transparent. It's like a leaderboard.
Yeah, I think it's not dissimilar to the screenshot that I pulled from like Andrew Hill's like textile notary stats repo. It's just putting it in a place that looks a little nicer maybe and has some of the stats that we think are important. So probably work on getting like an RFP out for that at some point and seeing if we can get a grant for someone to develop it. But if anybody wants to specifically be involved in that or be part of influencing what that looks like, please let me know. Definitely all this stuff will happen on GitHub anyway, so you'll be able to track the conversations. Cool. The next thing I wanted to flag today was around the deletion of applications. So I mentioned this when we were earlier in the slide deck. All the applications that are getting actual data cap are still tracked, right? Like all the messages are in an email inbox for the bot, and all the data cap allocations made are trackable through the dashboards, but people still, for some reason, feel like they should delete their application. I'm kind of confused about that. Wanted to know if anybody had ideas or thoughts as to why that might be the case, and maybe what we can do from like an educational standpoint to ensure that like we're meeting client expectations, or they understand what they're really signing up for once they get into the KYC and due diligence process.
I think it comes back to your question before around do we have any insights? But the best insights we have will be asking them, right? Like what do they think they need to do that? We've been playing around with an interface that is not GitHub that will hook into GitHub. So GitHub's a dev tool, right? Like unless you're familiar with it, like it'll look, it's not the best UX. So, who knows why they're doing it, but let's ask them.
Yeah, that's probably the best way to go. If we don't already know, absolutely agree. what is the tool that you're using? Would love to hear more.
Oh, remember I shared it with you and Galen a while back. It was early stages, but we're trying to onboard some resellers, and they look at GitHub and they're techie guys, and they're like, oh, you know, there's got to be a better way. So it was just I'm just mucking around in a Squarespace site at the moment, which is a proto for how do we ask them the same questions that allows them to apply for data cap. But then once they're a client, they move into a logged in state with a dashboard, and you know, it could become it's like their portal, right? So that's something that we need to build at some point. When I say we, I mean the whole community need to build on top of, the network.
Yeah, that would make sense. Do you think that that's something that would be applicable to other notaries as well? And something that they could tap into using, or is that mostly just for the clients that you're specifically working with?
Well, we'll work it through. We're happy to share that. And we're running a hackathon in November, right? And so we've decided to split the two streams into a design stream so that we can get some design thinkers to have a look at UX and CX, which is, I think, new. Like, we're working with your guys who are big sponsors of it. So I think it's about the right time to start to test some MVPs.
Nice, awesome. Makes sense. Okay, switching gears a little bit, Meg, from the conversations we had 2 weeks ago. First one on your market assessment grant. Did that make any progress? I did a little bit of pushing off the call, and it seemed like there were some like tactical next steps that we could benefit from.
Yeah, it was awesome. Actually, action happened the very next day, which was great. So the Filecoin Foundation see that there's a lot of value in doing a co-authored report with IDC that does a really broad survey that allows us to then focus at the second round on some qualitative stuff. So the questions you're asking are all very real, right? Like if we had a database of people that we could go to and we could start to ask some of these questions. But the first part is that we are going to start this, like the outcomes of this report or this work that we do with IDC will only be as good as the question set. So my ask is to the notary community who wants to have a look at what we're crafting with them. And if for your specific region or vertical, you have something that you want to know, then now is the time, like in the next few weeks, to take that on so that it can be useful for everyone.
Yeah. We should probably do some sort of dedicated brainstorm, maybe in some way for something like this.
So I'm having the kickoff with them tomorrow.
Okay.
And then, between now and the next notary call, it would be great to do something where we can get a whole community to nominate. Maybe it's a survey, I don't know. Maybe we have a look at what we're proposing and then we ask for other ideas.
Yeah, I think that sounds better. So maybe after your initial conversation with them, if you then just post a discussion saying, hey, here's what we talked about. Does anybody have ideas that fall into this scope? And see what people come back with. I think that'd be great.
Yeah.
Cool. And then the last thing I wanted to touch on was around your proposal on service levels and in general sort of pushing like commitments and expectations for notaries. So this morning when we were talking about DAOs, Andrew Hill had this really interesting idea, which was around how in many DAOs there's this concept of a guild, where a guild or like in the dashboard I just showed you, there was like this work stream thing, right? Which is like you have a set of people that are organized around specific work streams. And an idea that I've been toying with through the work day to day as a result of that was maybe that's like the way in which we start to think about how we'd want to structure our interactions as a community or as a group, as a working group, where we can define like work streams that are of interest to us that might align with like these different like buckets of goals that we've set to ourselves. And then that becomes like an active like brainstorm community basically, or like the set of people that align on the problems and propose solutions that the rest of the community can then much more quickly action or decide on, instead of always needing every single person to hold the same context and like moving with every single notary at the same time. And so that was a pretty interesting idea where I don't think we're necessarily ready for like SLAs yet, but I view these all as like stepping stones towards that, where like we can get a leaderboard up where we can start to see the natural fits. Then we can start to do like guilds or like working groups within Filecoin Plus that are dedicated to, somebody like a working group dedicated to data cap abundance and ensuring that we can get to 500 PBS or feel like we can support that scale, or like a working group dedicated to how do we solve the encryption problem, or dedicated to TTD and tooling that might need to exist to decrease that. And so that could be like an interesting and a compelling way to go in the immediate term, even like that's not a difficult thing for us to do. And that's something we could do as like a structure of like how we interact in the next like couple of months, even as an experiment, but in general, like as a stepping stone toward being more of a DAO and less of a group of people that are just randomly pinged by clients that want verification. I thought that was a pretty interesting line of conversation.
Yeah, look, I think you guys were talking about a survey, right? So asking the notaries what they want and why they're here. And like notaries in Australia are like actually quite a revered role, right? Like you have a seat at the table and you got to fulfill that. And if you don't, then your rights are rescinded. So I think it would be good to reframe like why did you do it in the first place? And are you still connected to that, and do you have time for it? And if not, then these dashboards are great for actually saying, well, maybe this is not the right time for you if you can't contribute to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's reasonable. I think that makes sense. Any other thoughts, topics, ideas, things that people want to bring up? Awesome. I think this might be one of the first. I think we've had this once before. This might be the second governance call we actually end on or before time. So that's kind of awesome. Yeah, I think if we're good, then I'm happy to wrap up. Danny, anything else you want to flag or?
Cool. Nope. This has been great.
Cool. And then I know the notary from Bing He is here as well. All good. Guess I'll take that as a yes. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and hit the recording stop button shortly here. Thank you all for making it. And for those of you watching the recording, thanks for making the time. Hopefully we'll catch you at the next governance call.